Okay.
It's like Black Friday.
So glad to see that you all made it. I hope that everybody made it through the storm all right, that your families are all right, that everything is more or less okay. Everybody got my email about the revised schedule for the week, right? So we're just going to have to skip the poems of Sappho, which I don't like doing, but is necessary, and we'll go straight to Lysistrata next week. Okay. So to begin, does anybody know who this is?
Dionysus.
Yes, and how do you know that?
Because it says
Because it's
on me.
okay. Do you know who Dionysus is?
He's like the god of like wine and like yeah.
Okay, yeah. Greek god of wine, partying, and sort of general frenzy, right?
Wasn't there like a story that like he like took the form of like a donkey and like tried to rape like another like was it like Hera or like Hestia, one of those?
That's not a story I'm personally familiar with, but yeah, I mean there are lots of stories of Greek gods taking animal form and using that to try to take advantage of mostly unsuspecting mortal women. Does anybody know how or why Dionysus is relevant to this particular play? Or, well, to Greek plays in general?
That's what they blame when people go into a frenzy or drink too much or party.
Sure, they blame the god, they blame Dionysus, or they blame Pan, the god of wild places, right? That's where our word panic comes from, supposedly possession by the god Pan. So, all Greek drama was part of, it was performed as part of a festival that was held in honor of Dionysus, right? The festival was called the City Dionysia. Now, given the Greek works we've looked at so far, what sorts of qualities did the Greeks seem to value in a person?
Hospitality.
Okay, yeah, hospitality is a big one.
Established oikos.
Okay, yep. Established oikos is a big thing, right? Man and woman in their separate spheres in the house, woman subordinate to the man, right? What else? As far as a person's character is concerned.
Their honor.
Okay, honest, forthright, although Odysseus gets pretty far without being honest and forthright, right?
If they practice like Greek customs, like honoring the gods,
Mhm.
supplication.
Yeah. So they have pretty specific means of testing whether someone is or is not by their standards of barbarian, right? The ideal ancient Greek man was a creature of logic and moderation. Now, this wasn't how people actually behaved. This was just how ideally they were supposed to, right? You were supposed to make your decisions coldly, rationally, by examining all the evidence, right? Dispassionately. Logic and reason were regarded as masculine attributes. Intense emotion was regarded as a feminine attribute. So, given the way Greek self-image worked, would Dionysus, do you think, be a god that they were particularly comfortable with most of the year?
No.
Yeah, frenzy and drunkenness are things that are kind of a no-no most days, right? But during the city Dionysia, those usual rules were suspended, right? The image of the god Dionysus was usually kept in a shrine outside the city because they didn't really want that energy in the city during the year. But when the festival occurred, which was like most ancient world religious festivals, a fertility festival, right? The people would carry the image of the god through the streets, and they began at some points performing songs in a formal way in honor of the god. Right? These songs were called dithyrambs. Dithyrambs. And usually they seem to have involved the fall of some important hero, some famous figure from history or from mythology. Eventually, these dithyrambs take the form of a single actor interacting with a chorus, right, where the actor represents the hero, and the chorus represents the people of the city. These plays evolve further and begin to involve elaborate dance routines, costumes, and finally, by the time Euripides is writing, 3 actors interacting with the chorus, right? Now you may note that there are more than 3 named characters in the play, but in an ancient Greek play, you will never see more than 3 actors on stage with the chorus at the same time. All the actors wore masks. When they had to come back and play a different character, they would simply go backstage, change mask, and come back as someone else. All roles were played by men. It was not considered seemly for a woman to perform. And prizes were awarded for the best plays. Right, so there were, judges, usually city elders, who would sit and watch the performances. Each playwright would present a trilogy, 3 plays, plus a satyr play. The 3 plays did not necessarily relate to each other in a specific way. They might have thematic similarities, but they weren't like 3 parts of the same story. They would often tell 3 separate stories. And the satyr play was usually a really filthy parody of one of the serious plays, one of the tragedies. So, the winner usually received a goat as a prize. Don't sneer at this. A goat was actually worth a lot in ancient Greece. And so, one proposed etymology for the word tragedy is that it comes from the Greek tragos, for goat, and that it means goat song. Right? The song you sing to win a goat. So, that's a little bit of the origin of Greek tragedy. Let's sort of talk a little bit about what a tragedy typically looks like, and sort of how it operates as a genre, right? What the Greeks mean by tragedy is not necessarily what we mean colloquially by tragedy. When we talk about tragedy, what do we usually mean? Okay, death, misfortune, right? Something bad happening to someone, right? Oh, it's a tragedy. For the Greeks, tragedy referred instead to a specific plot formula that sometimes ended happily. Right? Tragedy didn't necessarily indicate disaster for the Greeks. Most tragedies are unhappy, but not all. So probably the best summation we have of how the Greeks thought of tragedy comes from the philosopher Aristotle, who wrote a treatise called the Poetics. And it was in two parts. There's one part on tragedy, one part on comedy. The part on tragedy has survived, the part on comedy has not. Actually, relatively few ancient Greek plays have survived. The ones we have, we believe, are those that were sort of the most popular and the most talked about and performed by subsequent generations. So, this is what Aristotle says about tragedy in the Poetics, how he defines it. Tragedy is an imitation of an action right. The idea of imitation here is important. Most Greek art theory is concerned with art as an imitation of nature. Tragedy is an imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and possessing magnitude, right? That is, it's an imitation of an action that is important and not ridiculous. In embellished language, right, by this he means in verse, in the mode of action and not narrated, so performed and not told to you, and affecting through pity and fear the catharsis of such emotions. Now, the word catharsis is a little bit tricky. It doesn't really translate directly into anything in English. The closest thing it translates to is purging. So the general idea that most people get from Aristotle is that the purpose of tragedy was to bring this logical, rational, moderate population of the city of Athens together during this festival of unreason to give them a collective opportunity to give vent to the negative emotions that they kept suppressed all year. Right, so we have this one big blowout party once a year. We watch these plays, and these plays help us work through these negative emotions that we must constantly keep clamped down. And then we can go back to being Spock-like and unemotional for the rest of the year. Till next year when we bring the image of the god into the city again, and, you know, repeat process over and over and over, right? But one thing that's kind of interesting about Greek tragedy and the way it works on the level of plot is that it's not just emotions that are purged. Usually, by the end of the play, difficult or problematic people are also purged from the community. Right? It's not just a purging of feelings, it's a purging of people who cause strife, who cause disharmony in the community. They're not always killed, but they always exit, right? They always leave. How many of you are familiar with the story of Oedipus? Okay, good. Lillian, can you give us a short synopsis of what Oedipus is all about? What do you know about Oedipus? Okay.
Oedipus is separated from his parents.
Mm-hmm.
He comes back and kills his father and marries his mother.
Yeah, that's sort of the base level plot here, right? There's a little bit more to it. Now, why is he separate from his parents?
Yeah, didn't his dad get a prophecy that his son was going to kill her?
Yes, a prophecy, right? That the baby was going to grow up to kill his father and marry his mother. And so they leave him out in the wilderness to die. That was the typical Greek way of getting rid of unwanted people. You left them out in the wilderness where they were likely to die, And then if they did die, well, you didn't actually kill them, so you're not responsible for it. It's not your fault. You just let fate take its course. It was their fate to perish. And if it was their fate to survive, they'd survive. Well, it turns out it is Oedipus' fate to survive. And he's found by a shepherd and adopted by the king and queen of Corinth. He gets the same prophecy as an adult, right? That he's going to kill his father, marry his mother. Well, he doesn't know he's adopted. So he says, oh, I can never go back to Corinth again. Starts wandering towards the city of Thebes. Meets an old man on the road. The old man says, get out of the road. Oedipus says, make me. They fight. Oedipus kills the old man. Heads back to the city of Thebes. Solves the riddle of the Sphinx, right? This sort of half bird, half woman, half lion creature. Well, that's actually, okay, 1/3 woman, 1/3 bird, 1/3 lion creature. Saves the town from the beast, right? And gets to marry the queen, recently widowed. Right? We see all of this falling into place before Oedipus does, right? The city is hit with a plague. The oracles tell them that it's because of the unpunished murder of the old king. Oedipus resolves that he's going to find the murderer no matter what, not realizing that he is the very murderer he's looking for. Right. When he realizes this, and when his wife/mother realizes who he is and what they've done, she hangs herself, and he puts out his eyes, and most importantly, leaves the city and the stage, right? So the whole idea of the play is to get rid of this problem-causing person, right? He's the one who brought the plague upon us. He's the one who has to go. Medea works in similar ways, right? Now, this would have been, to a Greek audience, a familiar story. Greek playwrights almost never invented their own plots. They usually used plots taken from history or from mythology. But Euripides is a little bit unusual for a Greek playwright in that he often alters the stories that he tells in his plays in a couple of significant ways. Right. One, he often plays up the shock value of certain events. For example, in the original myth on which this play is based, Medea kills her children by accident. She does not do it as a sort of intentional act. That's Euripides' invention. Secondly, instead of focusing on the lives and deeds of heroes, Euripides is really much more concerned with domestic life and its struggles, right? He doesn't give us here Jason and the Argonauts' famous quest for the Golden Fleece, right? What he gives us instead is the unpleasant aftermath of that adventure. What happens when the hero and the barbarian woman he picked up in the beyond have to live together afterwards. Or, well, in this case, decide to stop living together. But this is another interesting thing about Euripides. His central characters are often women, foreigners, or other people who are outcasts or outside the mainstream in some way. He tends to focus his plays on the difficulties faced by outsiders in Greek society. And his work is often though we can say this is probably arguable in the case of Medea, is often much more sympathetic to these groups than that of his contemporaries. So, what can we say about Medea herself? Simply the character. How is she unlike Greek women?
Isn't she a mistress?
No, she's his wife.
Well, she's single and she doesn't like answer to any men. It seems like because usually like the
she
Greeks.
keeps fighting. Like, every time Jason tries to supplicate her, she's like, "No, I'm not going to do this." And when
Yeah.
the king tries to, "You're going to leave," she's like, "Please don't."
Uh-huh.
She doesn't just roll over and like, "Okay."
She's very anti-Kyrios.
Okay. So yeah, she does as she pleases, by and large. Right? And does not simply roll over when someone wrongs her, right? She does not simply accept it when Jason decides he's going to divorce her and marry the Princess of Corinth.
She plays murder all of them.
Yeah. she takes them all out. There is, by the way, a specific logic behind that as well, that doesn't have to do with simple gratuitous cruelty. Right? There is a logic to the way she takes apart Jason's families. But we'll get to that in a little while. How else is Medea marked off as different?
She meets all the requirements. She's a woman, she's a foreigner, she's considered an outcast.
Okay, yeah, she is a foreigner, right? That is very important. She is not Greek. And this, it seems, is part of the problem, right? Jason, who is by birth anyway a prince, has brought this barbarian woman back from beyond the Black Sea and married her and had 2 children with her. These children are half barbarian, right? And Medea herself doesn't always behave the way a Greek woman ought to, or at least the way a Greek woman ideally ought to, right? Now, we also get some sense of her history if we look at the beginning speech on page 786. It's made by not by Medea herself, but by the nurse, one of the family slaves that works for her. Can I get a volunteer to read on page 786, starting with "I wish the Argo never had set sail"?
I wish the Argo never had
Thank you.
set sail, had never flown to
Colchis.
Colchis through the dark clashing rocks. I wish the pines had never been felled along the hollows on the slopes of Pelion to fit their hands with oars, those heroes who went off to seek the golden pellet for Peleus. My mistress then, Medea, never would have sailed away. To reach the towers of Ilicus's land, the sight of Jason never would have stunned her spirit with desire. She would have never persuaded Peleus' daughters to kill their father, never had to come to this land, Corinth. Here she lived in exile with her husband and children, and Medea's presence pleased the citizens. For her part, she complied with Jason in all things. There is no greater security than this in all the world, when a wife does not oppose her husband. But now there's only hatred. What should be most loved has been contaminated, stricken, since Jason has betrayed them, his own children, and my lady for a royal bed.
Okay, you can stop there. Thank you. So, a couple of things here. First, if we look at the wish the nurse makes at the very beginning of the play, what does she seem to be wishing for?
Medea never met Jason.
That Medea never met Jason, right? That none of this had ever happened. Right? That these two had never got together. That Jason had never come to Colchis. Colchis, by the way, the kingdom that Medea comes from, is located roughly where present-day, not the state of Georgia, but the country of Georgia is in the Caucasus Mountains, near Russia. So, yeah, so essentially what the nurse seems to desire here is to erase this whole history, right? Turn back the clock on this. Go back to the way we were before Jason came to our land. Now, what else do we learn about Medea through this speech? What do we know she's done in the past? Pardon?
She listened to her husband and did what he wanted.
Okay, yeah, she has listened to her husband.
She manipulated kids to kill their dad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So while she has participated more in a more or less harmonious oikos herself, right? She has also destroyed other people's families. She's destroyed other people's households. Right? She convinced the daughters of Jason's wicked uncle Pelias to boil their father alive. Right? She is not above destroying a family. But who is it always done for? Always for his benefit, right? When she destroys someone's oikos, when she destroys someone's harmonious family unit, she does it for Jason. What about her own family? What do we know about her relationship with her own family?
She killed her brother.
Yep, she killed her brother, dismembered him, and threw the parts into the Black Sea, right? So that her father would have to stop and pick them up. And it would slow down their pursuit of Jason, who's getting away from their kingdom with the stolen golden fleece, right? So yeah, she has killed her own brother and betrayed her own family for Jason's sake, right? For the sake of this foreigner who came into her land, whom she fell in love with. And now, what has he had the brass balls to go and do?
Marry someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's kicked Medea to the curb with her 2 kids and married the princess of Corinth. So he's married a much younger woman and made himself heir to the throne, right? Some serious social climbing here. Is Medea going to benefit from any of this social climbing? Why not?
Because she's the other wife. She's the ex-wife.
Yeah, she's the ex-wife. And not only is she the ex-wife, but
A barbarian.
yeah, she's a barbarian with no rights in this place.
And her children are threats to the throne.
Her children are potential threats to Jason's future children, right? He says, well, it'll benefit all my sons, right? If I have, royal children. So, but are the royal children he fathers with the Princess of Corinth going to want those half-barbarian half-brothers around? No. They're not going to be safe, right? Anything to eliminate a rival. And what about Medea herself? Is she going to get to stick around and watch her kids grow up, even if they do stay in Corinth and stay alive?
No, but she could poison them against family.
She could potentially poison the boys against the family. Therefore, she has to go. So even if the children are permitted to stay, there's no way Medea herself will be permitted to stay, right? She is going to be pushed out of Corinth no matter what. Now, there are other ways in which she is different from Greek women. Remember what the gendered stereotypes are for men and women we talked about just a moment ago? How are men supposed to be? Yep. Logical and rational, right? And how are women supposed to be?
Over emotional.
Yep, over-emotional, right? The basic stereotype is hysterical and oversexed. Right? This is why Jason keeps talking about Medea worrying mostly about her bed, right? This is the Greek stereotype of women. right? That essentially all women are hysterical nymphomaniacs. But Medea doesn't quite fit the stereotype, right? She is certainly capable of strategy, right? She's certainly capable of logic, of reasoning, of plotting. And how does she work her will on the men who oppose her? How does she manage to get Creon, for example, to let her stay? Yeah. What do we call that gesture again? Do you remember? Yep, the gesture of the suppliant, right? You drop to your knees, you hug the other person's knees, touch the right hand, and beg for help, right? And then if they don't help you, they are sinning against the gods, right? If your request is reasonable. So, remember, this gesture of the suppliant is a gesture of submission. You're putting yourself in someone else's power. Now, is she actually putting herself in Creon's power?
Well, kind of in a way. Because if he says no, either way, then she wouldn't have been able to do what she wanted to do.
Yeah, well, she's extracting a favor from him, right? But who actually has the upper hand in the exchange? She does, because she already has a plot in motion to get back at this guy, right? She wants that single day not to pack her bags and get ready to go. She wants that single day to systematically murder every member of the royal family. So she has the upper hand because she knows something Creon doesn't. Right? She knows that she's painted a target on his back. He is not aware of this. Now, what about her dealings with Jason? Yeah, she does not submit when he shows up, right? At least not the first time. It might actually be useful for us to go through at least part of this exchange. So can I get a couple of volunteers? Can I get a Jason and a Medea? Okay, Dacia, you be Medea. And can I get a Jason? Chris, you be Jason. Okay, so start bottom of page 797 with "This is not the first time." Enter Jason from the right.
This is not the first time. I have often observed that a fierce temper is an evil that leaves you no recourse. You could have stayed here in this land. You could have kept your home by simply acquiescing in the plans of those who are greater. You are now in exile because of your own foolish words. To me, it makes no difference. You can keep on calling Jason the very worst of men. However, the words you spoke against the royal family, well, consider it again that nothing worse than exile is your punishment. As for me, I wanted you to stay. I always tried to calm the king, to soothe his fuming rage. But you idiot, you would not let up your words against the royal family. That's why you are now in exile. All the same, I won't let down my loved ones. I have come here looking out for your best interest, woman, so you won't be without the kings you need when you go into exile with the children. You'll need money. Banishment means hardship. However much you hate me, I could never wish you any harm.
Okay, so before you get started here, do you notice how Jason approaches her? Whose fault, as far as he's concerned, is all of this?
Her fault.
Totally her fault, right? He accepts no blame for what's happened. Go ahead, Dacia.
You are the worst. You're loathsome. That's the worst word I can utter. You're not a man. You've come here, most detested by the gods, by me, by all mankind. That isn't courage. When you have the nerve to harm your friend, then look them in the face. No, that's the worst affliction known to man, shamelessness. And yet, I'm glad you've come. Speaking ill to you will ease my soul, and listening will cause you pain. I'll start at the beginning. First, I saved your life. as every single man who sailed from Hellas aboard the Argo knows, when you were sent to yoke the fire-breathing bulls and sow the deadly crop. I killed the dragon too, the sleepless one, who kept the golden fleece enfolded in his convoluted coils. I was your light, the beacon of your safety.
Okay, hold up there a second. So, at least the way Medea retells the story here, who actually accomplished the quest of the Golden Fleece?
She did.
She did, right? He didn't do a damn thing. Yeah, go ahead.
For my part, I betrayed my home, my father, and went with you to Pylian slope.
Iolcus.
Iolcus, with more good will than wisdom. And I killed Peleus in the cruelest possible way. At his own children's hand, I ruined their household. And
Okay, so one thing I want to point out here to you quickly. When she notes here, she betrayed her home and her father. Now, do you remember from maybe a conversation we had last week, what happens in when a Greek woman divorced her husband? Yeah, she goes back to her father or her brothers. Medea can't do that, right? Medea has no recourse here. There is nowhere for her to go. Go ahead.
And you are the very worst of men, betrayed me after all that. You wanted a new man, even though I bore you children. If you had still been childless, anyone could understand your lust for this new marriage. All trust in oaths is gone. What puzzles me is whether you believe those gods, the ones who heard you swear, no longer are in power, or that the old commandments have been changed. You realize full well you broke your oath. Ah, my right hand, which you took so often, clinging to my knees. What was the point of touching me? You are despicable. My hopes have all gone wrong. Well then, you're here. I have a question for you, friend to friend. What good do I imagine it will do? Still I'll ask, since it makes you look worse. Where do I turn now? To my father's household and fatherland, which I betrayed for you? Or Peleus' poor daughters? Naturally, they'll welcome me, the one who killed their father. Here's my situation. I've become an enemy to my own family, those whom I should love, and I have gone to war with those whom I have no reason at all to hurt, and all for your sake. In exchange, you've made me the happiest girl in all of Hellas. I have you, the perfect spouse, a marvel, so trustworthy. Though I must leave the country, friendless and deserted, taking with me my friendless children. What a charming scandal for a newlywed. Your children roam as beggars with the one who saved your life. Zeus, for brass disguised as gold, you set us reliable criteria to judge. But when a man is base, how can we know? Why is there no sign stamped upon his body?
This anger is a terror, hard to heal, when loved ones clash with loved ones in dispute.
It seems that I must have a way with words, and, like a skillful captain, reach my sails in order to escape the gale that blows without a break. Your endless tired rain.
Okay, pause there for a second. Notice the metaphor he uses here, right? What's Jason famous for? The art of sailing a ship, right? So he's referring here to his past adventures, which are at this point long past, right? His glory is long since faded. And the tired metaphor of, a good order must be like a good captain. It prepares us for the line of bullshit he's about to feed us. So go ahead, feed us that bullshit, Chris.
The way I see it, woman, since you seem to feel that I must owe you some huge favor, it was Cyprus, no other god or mortal, who saved me on my voyage. Yes, your mind is subtle. But I must say, at the risk of stirring up your envy and your grudges, Eros was the one who forced your hand. His arrows, which are inescapable, compelled you to rescue me. But I won't put too fine a point on that. You did support me. You saved my life, in fact. However, you should receive more than you gave, as I shall prove.
Okay, stop there for a minute, right? Once again, we see he's not accepting any blame, right? It's not my fault you did all these things. You didn't do them because of me. You did them because the gods possessed you, right? Nothing to do with me. All right, continue.
However, you should receive more than you gave, as I shall prove. First of all, you live in Hellas now instead of your barbarian land. With us, you know what justice is and civil law, not mere brute force. And every single person in Hellas knows that you are wise. You're famous. You'd never have that kind of reputation if you were living in the edge of nowhere. As for me, I wouldn't wish for gold or for a sweeter song than Orpheus unless I had the fame to match my fortune.
Do you notice something ironic about the end of this little portion here, about the last half of this paragraph? Why is he telling her that she has received more than she's given?
Greece now.
Yeah,
Civilized world.
yeah, you're in a civilized country now, right? We have laws. And what does all this mean for her?
There's nothing. Really.
He's just believing it anyway.
She's about to be kicked out.
Yeah, it's because of these very laws, right, that she doesn't have any rights here. It's because of Greek laws that she and her children are about to be pushed out of their home, right? It's because of these Greek laws that her husband is permitted to just cast her aside and marry another woman. So she receives no benefit from living in Hellas, right, as her husband tells her here, right? And the whole being famous thing is also kind of a double-edged sword, right? What kinds of things is she famous for?
Killing people.
Yeah, poison, murder, right? Yeah, so yeah, she has a reputation. She is probably not so much famous as infamous. And this also works against her, right? And sort of limits the number of places she could potentially go. Yeah, go ahead, keep going, Chris.
Enough about my struggles. You're the one who started this debate. As for my marriage to the princess, which you hold against me, I shall show you how I acted wisely and with restraint, and with the greatest love toward you and toward our children. Wait, just listen. When I moved here from Iolcus, bring with me disaster and abundance with no recourse. What more lucky windfall could I find, exiled that I was, than marrying the king's own child? Not that I despise your bed, the thought that irritates you most. Nor was I mad with longing for a new bride, or trying to compete with anyone, to win the prize for having the most children. I have enough, no reason to complain. My motive was the best, so we live well and not be poor. I know that everyone avoids a needy friend. I wanted to raise sons in a style that fits my family background, give brothers to the ones I had with you, and treat them all as equals. This would strengthen the family, and I'd be blessed with fortune.
So the basic argument here, right, is I did it for you, baby, right? I did it for us, really? Really? Keep going.
What do you need children for? For me, though, it's good I can use my future children to benefit my present ones. Is that bad planning? If you weren't so irritated about your bed, you'd never say it was, but you are women, and you're all the same. If everything goes well between the sheets, you think you have it all. But let there be some setback or disaster in the bedroom, and suddenly you go to war against the things you should value most. I mean it. Men should really have some other method for getting children. The whole female race should not exist. It's nothing but a nuisance.
So if you didn't already think Jason was an asshole, right? This speech should kind of confirm that opinion, right? It's completely self-serving, right? He continues to absolve himself of any blame for what's happening to her. And he even says, like, what do you need children for, right? What's the good of you having children? I'm the one who needs sons, right? I'm the one who needs them. And we remember, again, the importance of sons in Greek culture, right?
You need them to carry
It's a living
your
legacy.
living legacy.
Yes. The sons are your living legacy. So if we think of it in those terms, right? Does Medea's murder of her own sons and Jason's new wife, thus cutting off the possibility of getting more sons, does that seem as overwrought and emotional as it might have initially?
It's pretty smart.
Yeah.
There's a logic to all of this, right? She wounds herself in killing her own children, but it is more important to her to make sure that this man who has wronged her suffers, right? She can't allow, as she frequently says, her enemies to laugh at her, right? She cannot allow for any feminine softness in her nature, right? She can't allow for anyone to stereotype her in the typical sort of Greek feminine mode. Right? Every time she starts to soften up and think, well, I can just take them into exile with me, right? She comes back to that. It's like, no, I can't let my enemies laugh at me. That's more important. She always comes back to somehow rationalizing what she is about to do. So, what do you make of her encounter with this guy Aegeus, the king of Athens? This is, for a lot of people, the part of the play that seems the most improbable and makes the least sense. But I would argue that there actually is something important going on here. First off, like, what's the plot function of this scene?
Basically, it gives her a place to lead. Like,
Yeah.
Exactly, yes. This is about securing sanctuary, right? Right, in terms of sort of simple plot device, Aegeus showing up at just the right time gives Medea an out when she needs it, right? She says, I can't finish my plot. I can't put my revenge into action until I have someplace safe to go to. And conveniently, in wanders Aegeus, who doesn't know what's going on.
He's also doesn't fit the stereotypical Greek man because she tells him what happened.
Uh-huh.
Instead of thinking she's just some oversexed woman, he's like, "Oh no, that's terrible.
Uh-huh.
Come to my house. I'll take care of you and your kids."
Yeah.
Jason's a terrible person.
Uh-huh.
So he doesn't fit the whole.
But he also
Well.
gets something in return.
What's that?
He also gets something in return.
Yeah.
She promises
Yeah.
him a child.
Yeah.
This is transactional, right? Yeah. Which is also kind of ironic in that, she is going to destroy her own children and show Aegeus how to get his own, right? But yeah, the important thing is, one, Aegeus does show hospitality to her, right? But in order to do so, he cannot violate the hospitality of his hosts in Corinth, right? So he can't actually help her get away.
Yeah, he's like, I find your way.
Yeah, it's like, okay, you find your way to my house, and I'll help you, but I can't do anything that would violate the hospitality of my hosts. Right, so this whole thing, it's sacred on both levels here, right? Now, what city is Aegeus the king of? Yes, he is the king of Athens. Conveniently, exactly where this play would have been performed, right? We tend to talk about ancient Greek drama, but it would really be more accurate to talk about ancient Athenian drama, right? All of the great playwrights of ancient Greece were from Athens. Really, it seems the only place where there was a tradition of drama was Athens. This was not really something that other cities did. But we see here the king of Athens welcoming the foreigner, right? Welcoming the outcast. Which seems to us a kindly deed, right? And Athens was, at the time the play was first performed, this would have been about 431 BCE. So 5th century BCE. Athens drew in immigrants from all corners of the Mediterranean. Athens was considered a particularly welcoming city. So on the one hand, Euripides is illustrating his own city's reputation as a haven for those who need one. But there is also a darker side to this. Right. By welcoming Medea, what is Aegeus unknowingly letting into his own city? Yeah. A multiple murderer, right? Medea has killed lots of people. And in particular, what have we noted her destroying? Families, households, right? Now, the household, we'll remember, is, for the Greeks, right, the entire basis of the social order. So, by inviting Medea into his city, he is inviting, he's inviting a destroyer of civilization, right? He's inviting this chaos beast into his town and giving her sanctuary, right? Promising that he will not hand her over to her enemies. Now, what this has to do with history, at the time the play was written, there were a number of itinerant teachers of philosophy and rhetoric going around Athens, mostly Athens. They were called sophists. Any of you familiar with the word sophist? What a sophist is? Who these guys were? Okay, so the sophists were mostly non-Athenian, right? Most of them came from the edges of the Greek world. And for a fee, they would teach young men how to argue effectively. What do you know about the government of Athens in the 5th century, if anything?
Wasn't it like a big old like thing all get together and then they would basically like have like they would argue with each other?
Yeah. Pardon?
A Senate, like it wasn't, you had the Senate and the Republic?
Not quite a Senate. I think you're thinking of Rome.
Yeah, sorry.
Athens was is regarded by some as one of the world's first direct democracies, right? All male free citizens of a certain age were permitted to vote on any question of civic importance, right? There was no official government. So, if you wanted a particular measure to pass, right? If you wanted to put a particular policy in place, what you did was get up in front of all of the other free male citizens of Athens and argue your case. So what these sophists would do for a fee is they would teach young men rhetoric. They would teach them how to argue effectively, how to sway people to their point of view. One of the most famous of the sophists was a guy by the name of Gorgias. And Gorgias claimed to be able to convince an audience of one thing and then turn around and convince them of its opposite. Now, the sophists have been kind of maligned by history, mostly because they were enemies of Plato and Socrates, who kind of won that debate. And the way they're depicted by Plato in particular is not flattering. But really, there was a philosophical method to what they were doing, right? Their basic belief was that there is no absolute truth that human beings can know. And so the closest you can get to absolute truth is through argument and through finding the best and most effective argument. But yeah, so there were a lot of people who viewed these sophists, because they were foreign and because they taught people rhetoric, because they taught people persuasion, as a destabilizing influence. That the sophists were going to have a kind of baneful influence on Athenian politics. And that's part of the danger that Aegeus is inviting into his city, right? If there's one thing we can see Medea can do effectively, it's what? Well, destroy households, right? But destabilize.
She could destroy his household.
She could destroy his household. But we don't really see her doing much destroying for most of the play, right? What do we see her doing? What do we see her doing, for example, in her interactions with Jason and with Creon? Pardon? Strategizing, plotting, persuading, right? She is extremely good at arguing her point, making her case. and at least up to a certain point in the play, keeping the audience on her side and, making us regard her as the wronged party. Which, okay, yeah, she is, right? But she's really, really good at getting people to sympathize with her, getting people to do what she wants, using language, which is exactly what the sophists taught.
Well, she also uses like her body language because they're saying when her friends would come to talk to her, she would just turn her head like this. And she'd have this whole broken, woe is me demeanor.
Oh, and that was part of rhetoric, right? Rhetorical training was not just about learning to use words. It was also about learning to use gestures, about learning not just to use facts, but to appeal to the emotions of your audience, right? It was a whole mode of self-presentation designed to sort of get maximum effect. It was designed to get your audience to believe whatever you told them. And yeah, Medea is a very, very effective rhetorician. Right? She knows what she's doing. In fact, most of the play, right? Do we really see much action happen on stage in the play? No. What do we see? What do we see happening mostly?
People exiting and leaving.
People coming and going, people talking, right? And most Greek drama is very talky. But in most Greek plays, it's long speeches. Right? A single character will get up, make a lengthy speech, someone else will make a lengthy speech in response, and so on and so forth, right? One of the things that's interesting about Euripides plays is that they're often framed as debates. Right? Most of Medea's interactions with other characters are on some level debates, particularly her interactions with Jason, and even her interactions with sympathetic groups like the chorus. Right? What's going on with the chorus here? What's the chorus? Yeah, the chorus is made up of the women of Corinth, right? Does anybody know what the function of the chorus is supposed to be in a Greek play?
To kind of tell them what's really going on. Anything that they don't understand.
Pardon?
Narrator?
Yeah, there's a narrative function, there's a, talking down the title character function.
It's like commentary.
Commentary on the action, yeah. Oftentimes you will also see the chorus insert hymns in praise of Dionysus into their dialogue, right? That's sort of revelatory of the origins of Greek drama, right? It started out as just a chorus singing hymns to Dionysus. So that element is kind of retained in later drama. But what the chorus is supposed to represent is the viewpoint of ordinary people. So the chorus is kind of the normative elements in the play, right? The chorus is really kind of supposed to be your window into the play, the perspective that you're supposed to adopt. So what is Euripides doing? This would have actually been pretty unusual, by the way, by making the normative perspective in the play that of the women. Okay, yeah, the idea is, that you would sympathize with a woman's problems, right? You would sympathize with Medea's plight, right? The play is set up in such a way that we're supposed to sympathize with Medea and never really quite abandon that sympathy. Yeah, Chris?
I think it's important specifically in the place where Jason goes through his whole explanation trying to prove how what he did was a good thing. Because they immediately say after it, it's like, No, you may disagree, but what he did was a disgrace, because like if it was a group of men included, they might say, oh, I can see how you can do that.
But
Yes.
they also flatter him as well. They
Uh-huh.
say, oh, you made such a great speech, but
Uh-huh.
you goofed up.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty speech, pretty words, right? But we're not buying it. Yeah, I think that's actually a really good and important point. Yeah, that allows the audience to see through Jason's rhetoric more easily than if the chorus had been made up of men, right? If it was sort of more normal kind of chorus. Yeah, the chorus tends to privilege Medea's viewpoint, but also pulls back from her more extreme tendencies, right?
Yeah, they don't want, like, the chorus doesn't want her to kill the children.
Yes, yeah, that's maybe going a little far, right? That's maybe pushing things beyond what we're comfortable with. Right, but remember that the ultimate goal here is that catharsis, right? That purging, both of the community's negative emotions and of the difficult person from the community. And this play is going to necessarily end with Medea's expulsion, right? Because however sympathetic we may find her at various points in the play, she is still a problematic person, right? She is still someone who causes trouble in the community. And because she causes trouble in the community, she has to go cause trouble in another community, right? Go do that shit someplace else. In this case, Euripides' own home city. Right? Medea is on her way. So how is it, once she's secured her place, her escape route, that she gets there?
Isn't it like a chariot, like she actually gets there like on a chariot?
Yeah, a chariot drawn by dragons, yeah. Some way to travel, right? Yeah, she escapes on a chariot drawn by dragons. And who sent it? How'd she get it?
Helios.
Yep. Her grandfather is Helios. And Helios is not the sun god or the god of light, right? Helios is the sun. Right? When you think of Greek myth and sort of that picture of a guy driving a shining chariot around the world every day, dragging the sun behind him, right? That's Helios, right? We sometimes confuse him with Apollo. It's not the same god. Helios is not one of the Olympian gods, right? The sort of, civilized gods of various kinds of arts and sciences and abstract concepts that the Greeks continue to worship. Helios is a titan. That more barbaric previous generation of gods, right? The parents of the Olympians, whom the Olympians supplanted. So Medea is saved because she happens to be related to a god. This is another thing for which Euripides was often criticized by his contemporaries. He was regarded as a little bit too irreverent towards the gods. The implication here being that a god would save someone like Medea, right? A multiple murderer. For what reason?
Family.
Yeah, she's family.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's divine nepotism, right? She gets to escape because her grandfather's a god. And Euripides often presents the gods as either behaving immorally themselves or as not exactly enforcing rules of morality on mortals, right? They tend to favor people capriciously. Yeah, Chris?
So at the end, her whole thing, we talked about was her about why he killed
Uh-huh.
potential the wife, or did they end up getting married before it happened, or were they adopted?
It seems that he has actually gone and married.
And then he kills her children, obviously, but
Mhm.
then she leaves on the married. Could he just go find, some random girl on the street, marry her, and have kids still?
How likely does that seem?
But,
He's pretty broken at the end of the play.
and then she's concerned about, people chasing after her, and so she goes, but she gives away where she's going to stay at the end.
Uh-huh. But she has also extracted an oath from Aegeus, right? That he would protect her and would never give her up to her enemies. So she feels pretty invincible as she's leaving, right? This is kind of, this is like Odysseus shouting his name back at the Cyclops in triumph, except that there really isn't a damn thing Jason can do about this, right? There's really nothing he can do now to hurt her. With the deaths of the children, I mean, that is essentially, it's her masterstroke against him. And also really, I think, inures her against future pain, right? It's like, I've already done the most painful thing I could possibly do. What else can you throw at me? Now, I think it's also interesting to note how she predicts he's going to die. Or if you look at the end of that speech you were talking about, Chris, on page 822, and you, an evil man as you deserve, will die an evil death, struck on the head by a fragment of the Argo. You will see how bitter was the outcome of my marriage. So how does she predict he's going to die? What's important about?
His ship is going to kill him.
Yeah, the ship that made him famous, right? The ship on which he made his, heroic journey. The ship on which he brought her back from her home to Greece is going to rot, drop a piece, knock him on the head, and kill him. So he's going to die, like, in his youth he was a hero. He's going to die an ignoble death at the hands of a reminder of that heroism, alone and broken. Yeah. Yeah, well, this, let this be a lesson against enraging, barbarian women that you bring from across the sea, right? So, one more thing I want to point to, and then I'll give you the reading questions for Lysistrata, which is going to continue a lot of the themes we've been talking about, particularly about gender, in a much, much lighter vein. If you look on page 822, towards the bottom, Jason's last speech, right? Zeus, do you hear how I'm driven away? Do you see what I suffer at her loathsome hands, this lion, this child killer? With all my strength I mourn for them now, and I call on the gods and spirits to witness that you killed my children, and now won't allow me to touch them or bury them. I wish now I'd never fathered them, only to see them extinguished, to see what you've done. So, how does this bring us back to the beginning of the play?
Wishing things didn't happen that did.
Yeah, the whole focus of the play, all of the action of the play is based on this idea of erasing the recent past and going back to some previous state of innocence, right?
And he's still blaming someone else.
And he's still blaming someone else. Yeah, it's never his fault, right? This is one more thing also, because Helios is the sun who goes around the earth every day, right? Measures out the day. What other concept then is he related to? Time. Yeah, he is a god of time. And it's the god of time. It's this god of the sun and of time, of daily revolutions, that lifts Medea out of the situation. All right, so I have questions for you.
The scene wanted to watch Hercules, the cartoon, and the scene where Hercules hits his head on the mast, he Like, be careful, that's when the aria. The
Uh-huh.
aria. Like, oh God,
Okay.
this is great.
I think
Okay,
it's,
so-
it's kind of
I
funny.
can't go do it without laughing.
All right. So for how many of you does most of your knowledge of Greek mythology come from Disney movies?
No.
Okay. All right.
But they do make some really good references.
That's comforting.
on Hercules. They make great references.
Reading that and then